Well, maybe we can see if you guys are really ready for this.
Oh yeah.
Pumped up now, come on. Right?
Yeah.
Get that back. Yeah! All right, here we go.
Oh, too cool.
All right. Get the blood moving, and you guys are already falling asleep. And I know how much you guys love too limited? Too unlimited, of course. Limited by English.
Nice.
Okay, so yeah, we've kind of talked about the framework. What did you do with my?
Oh.
Are you?
Yeah, there it is.
Series anyway. So the idea was look at these different frameworks through the lens of creating a basic blog application that showcases some CRUD functionality with some extra credit that was added if you wanted to extend it a little bit. Luckily for me, the Yii Framework comes with the blog example. It's prepackaged with it when you download it. So I got to focus a little bit more on the presentation slides and didn't have to do so much coding. I made a couple changes. Certainly it's up there on the GitHub site, which is the bottom link for anybody that, and the GitHub one has a little README and it comes with the Yii Framework package, so if you just clone it, it's got everything for you ready to go. You don't have to go through all that trouble of downloading a framework, which isn't much trouble at all. But it doesn't differ much from the example that's just on the Yii Framework site. But I did go ahead and put up the one that's the same one on GitHub at this yiblog.seesawlabs.com, which is just my domain. So you can check it out now if you're online, and we'll be looking at it throughout the talk. The rest of the stuff is my information. Jeff Wineset is my name, and some information there if you're looking for me. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of the 10,000-foot view of I'll call it Yii, but we'll get down to those last bullet points, and it's really got a couple different pronunciations. So it's a PHP 5 MVC framework, nothing special or unique necessarily about that. You've probably seen those. We've talked about those in this series, and we'll continue to. The brainchild of Chang Shui that started this in 2008. He was also the main developer on Prado, which is the first bullet point down there that you see, which used for inspiration for this framework. So it's a relatively young framework, but it certainly builds upon years here. So I'd hardly call it new, but in this instance, it certainly has been around alpha version in 2008. And it does take a lot of inspiration from a lot of other great frameworks that's listed here, and some of the things that it draws from. And then why is it called Yii? What is Yii? There is a Chinese symbol that sort of means easy, flexible, extensible, and really the pronunciation I would say is probably E, like the number 1 in that sound. I don't think that Yi itself is a sound in Chinese, but more and more people are saying it now, and podcasts are out, you're hearing it. I think it's your choice, really. Also, an acronym for yes it is. So that will give you a little background on who is this thing, Yii. And so what does it have? It's got a lot. It's constantly growing. Team of people developing it. A model view controller design pattern, which was touched on the last slide. It does have a strong relational active record, ORM. It's got DB migrations to help you out with your DB changes, backwards and forwards timeline, layered caching strategies. It's got ability with multiple implementations in terms of APC and Memcache and some other ones, but it allows you to easily cache at a content level, so just independent pieces of data. Certainly fragments like widgets or your portlets or containers on your page, as well as the whole page. authentication, authorization, off and off. I've listed both simple and role-based, and we'll dive into authentication a little bit later. It's got some web services, Ajax-enabled widgets. The list is much longer than this. Probably not a lot of differences here than the laundry list of other frameworks per se, depending on their maturity. But that certainly has a lot right out of the box for you. So to take a quick look at just a high-level look at what a request looks like for a VE application. So if we're assuming we're working on a blog, which we are for this example, we might be requesting a particular, you want to look at the detail view of one of your articles that happens to be associated with, say, an ID of 99. So that might be what your URL looks like. That's going to come in, and it's going to go through a entry script, an index.php entry script. It's going to create the application singleton and deal with the request, the writing of that request. And it will, again, this is going to be familiar to some that are similar to other frameworks. It's going to parse the request, and it's going to take a piece of it here, and it's going to, by convention, that's going to be the ID of the controller. It's going to handle that request. The view in this case is the ID of the action, or the method in the controller that's going to handle the specifics of that request. And then the rest are query string URL parameters. So typically you'll go in, the controller will say, okay, let's see, kick off my method that handles the view. It may or may not interact with the database through an active record class, but that's a typical request that you might have, especially this blog application. And so back out through the controller that will then render the view, and typically it's HTML that's sent back to your browser for viewing. Nothing terribly crazy about that. Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. So you might start off with Yii in this way. Say you have an idea to create a blog site. It's a killer idea. There's not enough out there. So after downloading the framework and having which is just a set of files, it's a pretty simple step, you can use a Yii command line tool that will get you going in terms of creating a skeleton application. So a simple command line argument like that on the command line will generate this skeleton application. Or assets or published entities, and your CSS for your CSS images, your two entry scripts, ones that will handle your testing, should you choose to do so, and I would encourage you to choose that. And then a lot of the magic happens here under the protected folder, which does not have to be in the web root. You can put that wherever you like, but to get things going, it's typically easy. Just stick everything in the web root and access index.php. And I've highlighted sort of the separation that underscores the MVC architecture. So it's got a place to put your models, which is by default named models. You can override that if you like. It's a pretty standard thing to call it. Your controllers, not surprisingly, are in a controller directory, and your views and your views. It's got tests and a place for themes, and not all these are even used or populated out of the skeleton command, but this is typically what you might be needing in a basic database-driven dynamic application. Any questions, concerns about that? So then we might move on to thinking about our data model a little bit. If we're going to store something in our persistence tier, we might model it out. You don't have to go too far, but for a basic blog post, we might think about a user and the thing that they want to write, which is post, and then maybe some comments on that post if you're going to get a little fancy. I think that might have been an extra credit option, but so you use your favorite tools to do what you need to do at your database layer, and then you can turn to leaning on another code generation tool that it has. You certainly don't have to, but this is a great and also very extensible code generation tool. So while out of the box, it allows you to quickly get skeleton application files in place with some basic functionality as well. So it's more than simply just scaffolding. Yes.
Where is this view happening in? Is this part of the framework that you see?
It is.
Log
It's-
into, or?
It is. So when I've dumped out this this application that sits here and you reference index.php, it's not accessible by default. You have to turn on this as a module in the system. And a module is just it's kind of a little self-contained MVC application within an application. So it's kind of it's self-contained in the sense that it's almost self-contained, but it has to be within an application to actually run. But it allows you to create your application in a very modular way. So something, for example, like I want to add a forum to my website. Well, that's a pretty big, chunky piece that might be a nice fat tab on top of your application that's completely separate, except that it needs some aspects shared within the general application. Certainly authentication might be an example. But for the most part, it might have its own models and views and controllers and do what it needs to do at that level. So in order to get to this particular code generation tool, you do need one configuration change. That's adding a module to your main configuration that sets this up. And it just basically turns on that module. And that does come with the framework. It's there in the framework files. And it'll have automatically a little login for you that you set the configuration so that you can treat it almost like a separate admin tool. But yes, just in the right along the application. So you can generate controllers in this CRUD generator, which is certainly relevant to our blog CRUD talk that we're having here. One that helps you generate forms, model and module generation for the modules that I was just talking about. But that list is extensible. So you can, the code generation tool itself is a little kind of mini framework that allows you that has a nice UI that you can, that you can repurpose from these. That gives you nice, I'm not actually looking at a browser, but if you hovered over here, it gives you nice pop-up little tooltips and tells you what each of these things are. But you can use it to generate your own templates of whatever you might need. I have actually leaned on it in the past when I was building an application that needed to do a bunch of parsing of different types of input. Actually, it was a travel related website that needed to parse your travel itineraries, and so there was a different parser for Expedia and a different parser for Travelocity and those kind of things. So it was nice to be able to use this tool actually so that you could kind of create the skeleton of everything that you needed to create a new parser, and then you can also have it generate your tests, at least a skeleton kind of block for your test files and those kind of things. So very, very nice tool. Could be a separate talk on all its own. And even with my knowledge and familiarity with the framework, I continue to lean on it all the time. I don't just view it as a cheap scaffolding tool when you don't know what you're doing. I like it quite a bit. And then when I'm saying lean harder on it, so here what I'm displaying is you've got your database table. Now you want a model. And in this case, that's an active record class that's wrapping your database table. And you can use this to do that by specifying a table name and a model class, and it will let you preview it and generate that skeleton class for you. When I say lean harder on this tool, now that you've got your model, you can actually lean on it to do your basic create, retrieve, update, delete functionality via this route. And so you feed it, in this case, you need to have a model class in place, and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to take your model class, and I'm going to dump out a bunch of stuff for you to get started. And so this is kind of assuming that the models that we want to deal with are the same ones that we modeled in the database, comment, post, and user, naming them the same for the most part. This is convention is an uppercase letter to start with your classes, and keeping with the lowercase convention in the database, but it really is up to you. And then it would generate, so this is what would happen basically, sorry, at the top of this, if you were to do the model stuff, then you move on to your CRUD generation, and it's going to stub out for you controllers for each, and then I only put up to fit on the slide an example, and in the views file, it's going to have a high-level directory for each of the views that are needed, but then as one example, the post one creates all of these separate views. So it is keeping separate actions and separate views for your create, retrieve, basically, and listing, update, and delete functionality. And it's nice that it actually comes with a basic search. So you do get some search functionality, and this is what the basic result is if you went to the admin section of of what results in the CRUD generation. So the CRUD generator actually lets you, if you're a particular user out of the box, then it lets you do some creating and updating and reading, but it won't let you delete, and maybe it won't let you do a couple of things. You don't get this admin view unless you log in as them. But again, that's completely configurable. That's just what I decided to choose because it sort of showcases the whole read, which is the little what do you call it, this icon?
Magnifying glass.
Thank you, magnifying glass. And then a edit, pencil, and delete of each of these rows. And then you do have the ability to search, which is a MySQL search in this case, on any of these columns. And so you can filter this down by searching on it. And there's a little advanced search, which actually is nothing more than a form. This is the exact same thing as the system.
What were the files with the underscores in front of them versus on the previous slide?
Yeah, that's a convention that's used for partial views. So typically in a view, if you're dealing with, you're going to view your web page, but everybody knows there's a lot of reuse in a web page. I've got a header, I've got a side nav, I've got a bottom footer, and those are typically in layout files. And a lot of times what you want to do is render views to say, I don't want any layout at all. Although you explicitly do that by calling a different method called render partial, but just as a convention, there's an underscore used to name those. Again, don't have to follow that, but it is something to go on if you don't already have your own list of conventions. Okay, so where were we? So I guess the idea was we started with an idea, went to the data model, created a model, using the tool, created some CRUD functionality to wrap that model using the tool. I get this as a result, and then typically you'll customize it. So as you can see, the end result is, it doesn't know what you need or what you don't. It's just displaying everything that you've defined in your table. It's got a primary key ID. It's got a title, it's got content. In this case, it's got tags right on the title. It's just a comma delimited field, a status, and a create time. You probably maybe you need to display this in certain cases. Or you don't want the status to be integers. You want that to be mapped to actual names, like published or archived. So what you might do is, obviously, now it's time to stop leaning on the cool tools, and you got to roll up your sleeves a little bit yourself, and you customize to meet your needs. So this might be an example of what you would do. You get rid of that ID field, got the title. Now I've got a drop down of statuses that look like real statuses to me. I don't have to remember that 1 is published or 2 is draft. Create time, and then I just hack off the rest. So it's just a representation of customization. So it doesn't do everything for you. All right. Any questions so far on anything? No? All right. So I've got here, it's kind of an ugly slide for some reason. It doesn't seem like I remember it looking quite this way, but I'm just looking at a basic controller action. So now I'm just going to, what does this stuff look like behind the scenes in the code? And in this case, it's the same basic request that I was talking about, which is, so a controller has an ID, and by convention, that's the first word or set of words up to the word controller. So the controller ID in this case would be post, and we saw that in the request. If we remember, you might have been paying attention. That's part of the request URL. And then the related action method also has an action ID, which also by convention is anything after the word action in your method. And so we're looking at a view. It's taking in an ID. It's going to interact with the model using a UI that looks like this, a static call to a model class, and the model return an instance. And you're going to find by the primary key, because that's what you have in this case. I've asked for post ID 99, and I'm going to go right to what I need. So I'm going to call a method called find by the primary key, and I'll check whether or not I got something back. And if I didn't, I've chosen in this case to throw an exception. Also using the framework conventions. Yes.
Can you explain the ID again? How it gets passed into that?
Well, as a couple versions back of the framework, it's got the binding done for you based on the request parameters if you specify those in an action. You can also explicitly get it by just using a get or post or the request method. But for this case, if you have an action that's specified with an ID like that, then it's expecting there to be an ID in your query stream that's called ID, and it's going to map it for you. It's going to bind it, parameter binding on the action methods based
So
on
it binds
parameters.
only one parameter,
What's that?
only the one, like assuming that's the ID parameter.
It will map to those that are named the same in the query stream. I've got the view ID 99. So it's going to take, I've got ID equals 99, and it's going to bind to the input parameters. What's going to look
So
like?
if you want to pass another parameter, you should give ID slash 99 slash some other name and slash some other value, right?
Yeah,
And the action view method will have two parameters there.
that's right.
And it's just in whatever order we do it.
That's right.
Got it.
And you don't have to lean on that. The parameter binding is there as a convenience, but you certainly can get explicit and just ask for the request ID instead. And that's how you had to do it until a couple versions back. Okay, and then luckily I didn't get a null value back. Luckily 99 was in my database, and I've got a post record back from, and in this case it will be an instance of an active record, the post model that was created by my model generation. And now I'm going to render a view file by calling render in this particular controller. That's all contained in the base controller class of the framework. And you can pass in an array of data. You can certainly pass data from the controller to the view. And you do that by specifying a name value pair of keys, an array where the key is going to end up being the same name as the variable as it's exposed in the view. So in this case, I'm passing in a post active record model called post. In this case, although I could have called it, maybe I should have to underscore that there is you don't have to call it the same thing as you call it.
So you have to explicitly tell it on this action I want to render a view.
Yes.
So if you didn't have that, you would go look something up out of the database and then you didn't want the white screen back. Or what?
Yeah, it would just continue to process the request and then you get a white screen back.
That's right.
Unless somewhere along the chain it had some other crazy error. Like it was trying to write to a log file and you didn't enter, and you see an error. Yes, you do have to explicitly say, I want to render this particular view. And so a view file, for this case, simple view file might look like this. HTML with a little bit of PHP thrown in, pretty typical. Other template type file. Certainly there's myriad helper classes to help you generate links and encode things appropriately. $this in a view file refers to the controller that's rendering it. So I can get back, I can certainly push and pull data, so to speak, from the controller to the view, and the view asking the controller for data. In this case, it's just using the controller's helper method create URL, so I can be sure that I'm respecting whatever my URL settings I have. I might be using a format that uses the slashes, like the path kind of format. I might be wanting to keep with my query string, or I might cook up my own crazy scheme where I've got something that's handling the parsing of that. But letting the controller create the URL will keep your URLs consistent, and then you can see the way that works. And then I can start to use my $post variable, which is that way because of this right here. The name I gave it right there is exactly how I'm going to reference it in my view, and I know that is an instance of an AR record, my post, and so I can start to access the contents in a OO way. Here, post content, post update time. Nothing too crazy about this probably so far. Normal if you've used frameworks in the past. Yes.
Are the parameters passed, are they filtered before they come, or should we use any filters to filter it, the parameters?
The input,
Yeah.
using the binding, it is, yes. it does have some helper methods to help you.
But it doesn't automatically come, save, sanitize and comes, something like that.
Right, well, there is a whole validation scheme that you can use in your controllers to set all kinds of rules for validating your input data, certainly for forms, and we'll see a little bit of that soon. What time is it? How am I doing my time?
30 minutes or 25 minutes.
30 minutes in? All right.
Plenty of time.
Yes.
Is this the code that's generated by the framework, or is this your own code here?
This is tweaked a little bit, but this is very similar to what you would get. I mean, it is still going to allow you to view so the CRUD generator, right, it does give you all the way through the presentation here. So it definitely stubs out view files for you, but it's going to display everything. It's just going to go through and say any attribute that you have specified, which is more or less going to be any column on your database table for your active record, it's going to list it.
But more, I guess, it's like using the create URLs to keep, I mean, is it using the best practices of the framework?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
generate, or is it
it's
just
written by the
magic
one
code?
who, the main guy in there, and certainly, yes, he's trying to encourage you to keep with the generated code for sure. Certainly, hopefully, no bad practices. But yeah, it's a great place to start. It really is. And then you can kind of pull on that. It's a great place to get examples. So we kind of looked at a basic example. I wanted to show a more sexy, complicated example of using the relational AR to get back your information. So in this case, for example, I want to retrieve a list of recently published posts that also are loading it with the author and comments along with it. So the relationships that I have in the tables that we saw back in the DB model. In this case, I'm kind of introducing two things at once, which are name scopes that are available, as well as eager loading of related entities, which means it will load it right when you are asking it to here, rather than wait until you decide you want to request an author or the comments later, which would execute a subsequent SQL offense. Which is the default. The default for everything you need, from loading classes to configuration to everything, is it waits until the last minute if you really need it, which is some performance. So in this case, I'm doing basically the same thing. In this case, it's a list view, but I'm using some name scopes and a width to get related entities up front. And then in this case, I'm showcasing what you might do with that data in a view, slightly different view. I have tried to showcase the partial. So I might, in my main view and list, I might say, okay, I've got this array of posts now, where it represents, I haven't just gone to find by primary key and would expect one post back. I've gone to say, give me my recently published ones. I get back an array of AR records. I'm sending that whole array to the view. And now I'm going to iterate over that array, and I'm going to render a partial view that just renders, what I need to for that little particular piece. And that little particular piece is going to be able to reference the username of the author of the post in this chain sort of way. So I asked, please give me back my posts with my related authors and comments, so I can get to that data by just saying post author username. And that's getting to my related entity. Again, there's down there the post comments. I try to highlight just the same from that, basically using width. Okay, I don't want to go too fast. I also don't want to go too slow. Some people fall asleep. Some people. Any questions or concerns? Yes, Josh.
I'm not trying to beat you up. I really.
Oh no.
Why do all the class names start with C?
A way to provide a namespace without using 5.3 explicitly, which it doesn't. So it is just a way to try to play nice with other frameworks, and a convention that they encourage you not to start your own classes with. That's pretty much it. And I don't know why C was chosen, actually. I've never asked. Why C instead of Y, for example. Okay, so I was going to just show you a little bit closer look at that. So the name scopes and the way that you might achieve that is by you can actually do name scopes in a couple of ways, but one way is to create a method in your AI class called scopes and add named, basically, criteria that you can specify, and it allows you to do what you want with this. So in this case, I've decided that published is an array where the condition is a status equal to 2, which just means published in the system. And then recently is limiting it to 5, and ordering by creation. And so also just to quickly touch on the fact that you can use parameterized name scopes as well. So you can create a function itself called the same as the name scope that you need it to, and you can put in a parameter, whatever you want in the input, and then you can use it to decide what you mean by this criteria. So you're not stuck with a hard-coded status equals 2 or limit equals 5. You can drive it more dynamically in this way. I guess it's a visual example down here. Feeding in the, now I can use the parameter of feeding it into right there. Okay, so yet another closer look at that AR. So I introduced the name scopes, and then we're going to talk about the width. In this case, I kind of already touched on that. The way that these relationships are explicitly set in the active record is in a function called relations, and you set up the name of the property, basically, of the class that you want it to be called. That's what you're going to access. And then you define the type of relationship it is. And there's a few to choose from. It has many, and in this case belongs to, or the two. So post does have many comments. And this is basically saying, I expect this to come back as an instance of a comment, AR record, and the post ID is the post key that leads me back to the AR record item. So here are my comments. The user is basically the same. It's a different relationship in the sense that the post just has one author. So there's not many authors per post, not in my model. And then I wanted to sort of just show you one step further down the road, because I think the API is fun. So that we have, in this case, we're looking at nested eager loading. And so I've basically said I want to, up front, I want to get my posts with my authors, and I want those authors' posts themselves, because they've written the post, so I might show a list of authors, and then underneath there, all of their posts. And I've stuck on to that the fact that I want to make sure that those posts are published. So in this case, I didn't specify, up front here, the recently published. So I would get back all posts, regardless of not recent, not published. But as I iterated over those, and we're looking at each author of those posts and that author's posts, those would be just the published ones. And this is going to ensure that there. So you've kind of got nested eager loading, and then with a name scope applied to the related model. It goes on and on. It's nice. It's fun. I thought I'd also show the resulting SQL. I know in the Lithium conversation there was a question about how do you see the SQL in this ORM? It's a black box, and I'm scared of black boxes. So in this case, by default, the has many relationship will actually execute an extra SQL statement. You can chain together another one of the options called together, so that you can ensure that you're getting a single SQL statement. Sometimes with the has many, a separate SQL statement based on the number of duplicate entries that can come back. If you're trying to do together, might be better performance. It may or may not. It's really going to depend on your scenario and your setup. But by default, unless you specify together, it's going to do a single SQL statement to get the post along with the belongs to author, but it's going to do a separate SQL statement to get the subsequent comments in this case. And it will use the result of this to know what are the IDs I need to put in my end statement there to get back my comments. And so to kind of dovetail into that, how is it that I'm able to view this SQL? without echoing out something or using some debugger. And there are great tools for doing that right in the framework, and we won't even get to touch on all the great kind of mini framework that's within logging itself. But you can specify that you want to enable profiling on your database. And in this case, I'm enabling the param logging, which basically means it will show me all the parameters, the values of the parameters that it's doing the binding to in the PDO. And then I have to specify it. And again, this is all specified in the main PHP config, which I know we haven't touched on, but basic configuration file is mostly array driven. And I'm saying here, I want to specify in my log application component, I want to specify a router. In this case, I want you to route it using the profile log route, which in this case dumps it out to that extends web log routes. In the end, you get it in your browser. And the report type, there's a call stack and summary. So in your browser on every page, when you want to work in debug mode, you get every single SQL statement that's executed on any page along with the time. The summary version of this actually has a lot more about averages and mins and max, but this one, and it does it in a slightly different order. In this case, the call stack is exactly the ones, the first one that was executed is the first one you see, and so forth in a timeline like that. And so while there's a few queries certainly that the ORM layer needs to do to understand the metadata around the tables, the basic SQL statements that are produced are here. Yes?
Do you know if it's using prepared statements?
I do think that it is using prepared statements, yes. But I'd have to double check. I'm almost positive though. I'm just not. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'll double check that.
I don't think prepared statements is supported on the Linux MS SQL driver. I think you have to use.
Yeah, there may be
some
some checks
databases
to,
that
I don't know.
PDO
I mean, it certainly supports more than MySQL.
Yeah.
So I haven't looked at the different ways that it might be doing that. But it's definitely using the parameter binding for sure. Okay, authenticating users. So I thought, in terms of the blog application, there's certainly a lot of aspects that we could look at, and we'll take a look at the CRUD functionality, which won't be, which will be pretty quick. I thought, though, certainly we're authenticating users. It's a pretty typical thing that you might do in a web application. In this case, for the blog application, we're allowing unauthenticated users to leave comments, but you have to log in to post. And then you can subsequently log in maybe as an admin if you want to manage that. But in this case, our simple blog actually just has a single user. It's you, it's your blog, you log in, you leave blogs, and you can manage and approve comments and those kind of things. But if you're not authenticated, you can just leave comments. And the framework that it provides for you for authentication might look a little lengthy in terms of the bullet points. It's not that terribly complicated, but it does isolate a few things to allow you to have different authentication schemes and implementations. So it has some separate classes for that. But certainly you need a form to put in maybe you're using a username and password, which is pretty typical, or an email and password. You want a controller class that's going to handle that postback information, and a form model typically. So in Yii there are two kind of models that we talk about. We talk about active record, which wraps a database table, and then there's form models, which really encapsulates the validation and other logic that you might need around a form. So it allows you to put a form, even if that form doesn't necessarily map to a database table, or maybe it maps to multiple, but it might just be a simple form that this doesn't have anything to do with the database. You can still use sort of the MVC architecture around that form and put your logic that you need to handle that form in the form. Then a web user object that just sort of represents your persistent identity of who you are throughout the session. And then a user identity object, and that's the one that really, that's where you put your validation, so that you can, today, just hit the database, tomorrow, do your Twitter unlock, or whatever you want to. You can extend just this layer, just this different implementation classes to handle your authentication schemes without changing the whole darn thing. So a sequence diagram of a successful login would look like and this is kind of after you looked at the username and password form. So you type in your username, type in your password, and you hit enter. It's going to go to the, in this case, it's the site controller, just happens to be the one that's handling the login. Could be anything you like. It's going to set the attributes on the form model, the login form model in this case, which just sets the username and password properties. That itself is going to, through the validation scheme that's defined in that, it's going to call an authentication method right in its class. And that in turn is going to do an authenticate on the user identity model, which will actually do the database hit. And if that comes back okay, which is basically saying, yeah, there's a username with this password, and that's good, and the authentication is a go, it will then call the web user object to actually do the login. And that's where some of the saving to cookie, if you want that to happen, will happen. And any other login logic that you might need. There's before and after login methods in the chain that you can do to handle any other thing that you might need to do in your business logic. And then assuming that there's just a successful request, it will return true in the end back. And typically, redirect the user to wherever they were before they hit the login page. But again, that's up to your design, how you want it to behave. So going through this, I guess, the sequence diagram and kind of looking at the code behind it, instantiating a new login form, and it's looking for a login form to be defined in the post, which is how if you're using the form framework, that's how it's going to come back in. That's how it's going to be posted back in. It's going to call validate on the model, and it's going to call login on the model. The model again is the login form itself that's housing that. And then of course if it's okay, so the model validate is going to be go check my username and credentials. The model login is going to be okay, everything's good, now do what I need to do to get this guy logged in. Then redirect to the return URL, which keeps by default where you have it. And then display the login form. In this case, if it's the first time through, you're going to get it all. So it's the same method that's handling it this time. And taking a closer look at the validate method. So we talked about validation in these active records, or controllers. In this case, in the form model, we're going to put specific validation on these properties. We're saying that we're defining this and using two built-in validators, so you can specify that in this case both the username and password which are on the form are required. So it will handle that for you. It will, in this case, there's a remember me checkbox. It will ensure that that's a Boolean. And then we're doing a custom method to handle the validation of the password field. And that's by just defining a function in the model that's the same name as that validator. In this case, authenticate. There's a function called authenticate. And it will instantiate the user identity, which in this case, the identity class again is just where we're putting that specific validation. And the user identity is something that comes with the framework because there's an assumption that it's pretty typical that you might use a username and password to validate the user. So that implementation comes for you, for free. So it does the authentication in it, and then if it doesn't happen to be what it thinks, then it's going to add an error to that particular user identity. And the form will again handle a lot of the error handling. So going down the path, the user identity itself, I tried to put in some arrows to indicate when those things are broken there. It's going to look to the database in this case, because that's the implementation that we need. We're storing our users in a database table, so it's going to use the user model, and it's going to try to find the user by username. And then, if successful, it's going to call a validate password, which is a method in the user model class that we define. It sends in the password, and then if that's not successful, it's going to add another error. Otherwise, it's going to set a little bit more information. It's going to set the ID to be the user ID that's in the database, and this is for the web user itself. And this is the stuff that might get stored in your cookie, for example, if you want to log in again without having to specify your username or password. So it's pretty typical you don't set properties that you don't want exposed, like in a cookie from your user identity. and set the error to none in that case. And then, as we saw, there was a call to do the authentication, which is good. Now we're going to actually do the login. We don't need to go through all of this, but in this case, I'm showing a little bit about the functionality that happens to call this user login, and just looking for whether the remember me was set, and setting a particular duration if it was. If not, then it doesn't set a duration, and that's going to be used in this case for the cookie duration. All right, and then I'm just showing basically in the framework, unless you override it or choose to use a different web user object, it does do setting of the cookie if you're allowing for auto login. Just sort of showing the rest of the whole cycle, which is what happens if you're using a default implementation for web user authentication. So in terms of authorization, I wanted to touch on these. So authentication is just that. It's going to say, want to validate, basically you are who you say you are. And then there's a whole other layer that allows you to say, well, do you have access to this piece of functionality or not? Do I want normal users to be able to get to my admin section? Do I want just anybody to be able to delete? What kind of rules do you want to set up around authorizing users? And so it also allows a nice place to capture that. There's a brief digression on filters, because this is the way you implement an access control filter. And so in this case, this is in the controller, and the access control itself is defined. It's actually defined as a method in the base class that you're extending in C controller. And it's saying that I'm going to specify that both the edit and create methods should only be accessed if it's a post. So otherwise, throw an error. So I only want post requests to come in to edit and create. And then there's another example of defining a filter as a separate class. You can extend in C filter and do what you need to for your other class object instead of a method-based approach to an object-based approach. And so I just added that in as a performance filter, which also, in this case, comes with the framework, but you could write your own C filter class. And you're able to specify its properties, if you like, in this array way. So in this case, there's a unit property with performance filter. I'm telling it to use the units of seconds, and it's going to do performance. And really, that's basically what's using, how we're getting some of this stuff, is it's using performance and profile filters to access and display that information. And in this case, it's saying only apply that, apply it to everything, every single method except edit and create. So that's the plus and minus controls that we see in terms of specifying what it applies to in the controller. Oh no, I'm going the wrong way, that's why. So basically, the basic authorization that we're going to be using this access control filter, and it's just simple access control. I can set up some access rules also in my controller, and I can specify, allow and deny the actions based on, and also specify a number of other properties. So I can say, in this case, I want to allow only, and there's a lot here, I guess. There's special characters, star and at, and actually there's one that's not included, which is the question mark. So the star represents all users. So in this case, this rule says, allow all users to access my index action, which is my default action for this controller. It might just display a list of posts. And also allow all users, not any authenticated or not, to look at the details of a post, so the view action, which is what that's happening. And then separately, and it goes down in the chain. So if that's hit and that's the rule, it will use that and be done with checking any access. It will then check. So I want to allow only authenticated users to access everything. So I haven't specified a list of actions, and by not specifying a list of actions, I'm basically saying let them hit everything. So if you're logged in, you've been authenticated, you're good to go on any action method that you like in that controller. And then at the end, it's denying the rest to everybody because you want to make sure that you're capturing that, the safety net. It's basically, because these rules are if there's a match, do the access, but otherwise it's just going to keep looking. And if you don't put something down here that basically is that safety net of saying deny everybody else, how'd you get through my access control rules? Well, here's the last one that's going to hit, and it's going to say, I didn't find one good one for you, you're any user at all, I'm going to just deny you access to it. It's more of a good practice than a necessity. All right, that was kind of a whirlwind. I know there's a lot in there. It's kind of tough to figure out in terms of a basic framework and overview because there's so much to it. Each of these could be separate long talks. I did want to at least, though, this is a talk about the blog application, which was focused on the CRUD, and we haven't really seen that yet. So where is the CRUD? So we'll go through each of these quickly, and it should be pretty brief. Creating a post, not surprisingly, it's looking to see if the post information is back in the request. And if so, it's going to, it does create a new model, and then it sets the attributes in a bulk fashion based on the stuff that's coming in. You do actually need to make sure that your attributes that you want to be set that way are in this thing called safe, which actually is safe validation. By default, that the public properties that you defined are, but you can not allow people to automatically set your object properties based on a post request. And then just call save, and if the save is successful, it's going to redirect in this case to the detail view. You save the new post, and it's going to just show you what you saved. And otherwise, if you haven't posted the data back, it's going to show you a new form. So it's going to render the create view and send in the model. Okay. I need to go back to the 2 unlimited one more time. People pumped. The R, which is the next letter in our acronym. So viewing a post. In this case, we are looking for the get ID. So I didn't do the binding here. Just explicitly looking for the get parameter. And I'm checking whether or not the user is a guest, which is a nice yes.
Is that assuming it's question mark ID equals whatever, or is Yii stuffing the
It will stuff it,
parameter
yes.
in there for you?
Your format is your choice. You can.
So it's stuffing get even if it's not a query string with the parameters for you.
Yes, after your controller and action ID, if you're using that different format, if you told it I want to use this other format for my URL structure,
Right.
yes. So basically, I'm saying, okay, is this user not logged in? If they're not logged in, which means they're a guest, and I'm going to ensure that the posts I'm going to display are in a reasonable status. In this case, published or archived ones are okay to display. I'm not going to display any that are in draft or haven't been approved yet or something like that. Else, okay, they're authenticated, and we're going to show the whole list. Throws an exception if it doesn't get anything back, saying that you tried to request something that doesn't exist. Otherwise, it's going to render the beat in the home, which we talked about. Yes.
So the status published and status archived, is that something that's generated on the model by the command line so it automatically understands those constants, or?
No, sorry, that is not something that, and I know I've definitely toggled between what's automatically generated and what's not, so apologies for that. In this case, these constants are just written, so we decided to define those right in the model, make it simple, and access in a static way, but they were explicitly typed. So it wasn't good.
What percentage would you say you end up with that you're typing versus models creating?
Well, it certainly depends on your application. I've showcased a lot of the nice features that do a lot for you, but it's far from that. There's a lot, typically. I mean, it's a fairly complicated web application. It doesn't know at all anything about your business rules. What it does, try to provide, which a lot of great frameworks do, is to let you focus just on that, so that you don't have to do a lot of the boilerplate code that you would normally have to do just to get some basic stuff going. How do I get data from my database back out to my presentation tier and back again? And so it stubs all that out for you so that you can focus on exactly what you need, why you need to display only published posts to non-authenticated users versus showing everything, but then certainly all the rest of the stuff. So this is assuming if you have a really basic application like this is, and you just want some simple display of content that's exactly what you've mapped in your database tables, then you do get a lot for free, and you can do a lot more just generation of the code and a little bit of tweaking.
Can you extend it yourself? Otherwise, can you take what you generate and say, well, when you generate that, instead of generating what you planned on, I want the following things added in every time you generate?
Yeah, so that yeah, absolutely. That talks to the extensibility I was trying to underscore of that Yii tool that we saw at the beginning. And you can, so all of those, maybe this is dangerous because I don't know how, but all of those in this, so when you're using this as it's a tool, it's a module in the framework. These again are just typical examples of what you might need, and in a typical way. These are all generating from templates that you can completely customize. You want yourself to have your own header for your company. You want to ensure that there's these conventions conform to. You can change all that, plus obviously add to the list. You want to make sure every time you generate a model, there's a test, a unit test that's subbed out, there's a functional test that's subbed out, all that kind of stuff you get to extend and ensure that happens. In an automated fashion. So yes, for sure. And why I was saying, I'd love to just talk about this tool, which could be another. Where's we were on the read, right?
Yeah.
The R, somebody remember this. So moving on to the U, I'm going to update. In this case, to save slide space and to not duplicate the code, I've slid in a method that's going to actually load the model rather than do this same exact loading of the model class. And then it's going to look again for if you posted back something for the update. If so, it's really the same. The same. Sorry, two slides back. The same. Code and renders the update. And there's nothing new here that I can think of. And the D for delete, it is again action delete method. Nothing surprising there. It calls it exactly what it needs to be. In this case, it's explicitly looking if it's a post request. Although we looked at those validations that would allow you to actually not have to do this particular request, because you could put the delete in the list of actions that have to be post, right, by post only in the access control. It is taking a look in this case that grid that I showed you, that admin grid, those delete buttons next to the magnifying glass and the pen and the delete or Ajax calls back to do that, which is done for you by generated code. So in this case, if that's what's being used to delete it, it's not going to render a file. But if it's not an Ajax call, it will redirect to the index. In this case, just back to where you were in that list of stuff deleting. Okay, I can't recall. Of course, I don't have my nice little notes with me. I knew I was going to get up here and go, why did I have this slide? I wasn't trying to understand this slide. Not this one, but most of But that's really that's the basic simple CRUD application that we're trying to focus on. Certainly the application that is there on that URL I mentioned, and really it's outside of the fact that I have that the profiling enabled. So as you go through each page, you're seeing what the database requests are, which is a nice feature. It's basically the same as the generated code from the framework. So there certainly is a ton more. Really, you know, why I focused on authentication versus how do you build widgets which are in there, or how's that comment approval stuff working, or how do you get nice Ajax client-side validation on your forms, which is also included in the blog tool, was mostly just because I feel like at least off and off is something that we tend to do almost always, so I think it's good to at least touch on that. But there are a couple books out, for sure. The definitive guide that's on the framework site is a great guide, and it is definitive in the sense that it's exhaustive in terms of its features. It might be a little bit short and lacking an example, which is something I'm actually focused on helping them with. But it does provide an exhaustive list, and it is, once you're a little bit familiar with the framework, it's a great reference. And then there's a blog tutorial that actually takes you step by step through the blog which we're talking about today. That's available on that site. And then there's a very own series that can help out too. And there's more and more blogs growing all the time that are pretty dedicated to this framework. Thought I'd end with some popularity stats of these so far. And these actually might be a little bit dated at this point. We checked within the last month. And the most recent release is now 1.1.8, which came out about a week ago. But about 2.5 million page views per month, which is definitely many times over what it was last year. And that seems to be steadily increasing. The downloads of the minor versions of the releases are substantial. More than a couple hundred user contributed tutorials. There's a nice wiki and good tutorials on the site, and good examples that you can get without having to buy any books. And a lot of user contributed extensions, so there's a good extension section. He also comes packaged with core developer sanctioned extensions, but certainly has a lot of user contributed ones as well. 6,000 registered form users. I don't have a good comparison. Is that large or not? It seems like a hefty number. But there's a lot of, you know, I've found that the forum is pretty responsive, and a lot of, at least I see a lot of thank yous for good responses. And a lot of forum posts as well. Obviously it continues to grow. And it's still really pretty early in Yii, looking towards 2.0, looking to take advantage of a lot of the features in PHP 5.3. It will not be backwards compatible, so 1.1 will probably live on for a long time. No plan to phase that out actually at the moment at all, but that will be exciting. And yeah, that's really all I've got for the blog series, but happy to take any questions and try to provide an answer or lead you in some direction.
Do you know how many core developers there are?
I do. There are, I'd say 5 listed, and I know that there's 1 or 2 steady committers that just aren't officially listed as on the team. It's intentionally kept small for now to control the quality and direction. But I know there has been chatter about how do we encourage a lot more people to contribute. And certainly, you know, just finding bugs and submitting those. There's certainly plenty of opportunities to commit code, for sure. But the ones dedicated to it is useful.
So what about unit testing? Like, I know Lithium last month had their own, they had written their own PHP type unit.
Mm-hmm.
would unit testing under this framework be done under PHP unit, or?
It is integrated with PHP unit, yep,
Okay.
for unit testing and Selenium for functional testing. And so we do have our tests folder that's generated for you here, and it's stubbed out the PHP unit XML file. And it extends some of those framework classes of PHP unit so that you have easy access to your rest of your applications and all your stuff that you might need. So you can reference your models and other things in your application in a normal way in your unit tests.
So it automatically creates any base template for that, like for the methods within the classes, something like that, or?
At the moment, the skeleton application actually doesn't stub out any particular unit tests for you. It does actually stub out some functional tests, actually, using Selenium, but it doesn't stub out any unit tests for you. But it does provide all the framework. All you need to do is add the unit test files yourself with your methods, and you know it does everything that you need to kick off the index-test for the entry script, which will reference a different, or well, it will additionally add and merge a test config so that you can specify a different database, for example, which you probably would want to do, and other test-specific configuration parameters, so that would get loaded with that. And it comes with fixtures so that you can easily get your database in a repeated state to repeat your tests. So, I mean, basically, when you're using a fixture, you're defining that either as just a table itself, because you haven't created a model for it, which is fine, or the model class itself, which will just work through the model with the underlying table. But it will truncate the table on each test. So everything you've defined in your fixtures, it will say, I'm going to reset this to this known state. And you specify what that known state is. You can put data in it or not. Yes?
There was one little reference to Ajax on your delete slide, but if you actually wanted to write an Ajax-based application rather than an HTML5-based application, is there functionality for that built in terms of generating different types of controllers and stuff like that?
There is. There's a lot of the widgets that come both packaged with the framework and obviously the user extended ones are ready to take advantage of the framework's code base that handles a lot of that for you. So 100%.
But in terms of how your app is structured, like I said, if you wanted to say to write like a single page app,
Yep.
that where your controllers, handle posts and so forth, but never redirected, always just return different types of
You can
data.
use the same actions. In the example that you saw, it simply just checks a convention that was used if Ajax would happen to be in the post, and if so, it doesn't render the view file. But you could extend that and change that as needed. But it's this set up to where you don't have to have separate methods by any means to handle the way that the data is coming in and going back out. But you might need to do a little tweaking in terms of what you want to step back.
According to YiiFramework.com, it is best for Web 2.0 development.
And we all know yes, that means best for your Ajax enabled stuff and rounded corners. Yes, Web 2.0, that's going to be pretty big.
Do you know when the Yii version 2.0 is coming out?
There isn't an explicit plan for that yet. No. So neither does the framework developer or those that are most focused on it. There's a lot of chat about what's going to be in it. But 1.1 still has a lot going on and a lot where they want that to be. So I believe December 2012 has been thrown around. But it's hard to say. I know when the core team gets focused, they can do stuff pretty ridiculously quickly. It kind of ebbs and flows as people have day jobs. Other stuff that comes up, kids.
Does it run on 5.3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been on 5.3 for, I can't remember when I was in.
So you went over the active record pattern a lot, and
I did, right.
So I just wanted to know if it was flexible enough, if like you could structure your models to to not use the active record?
Of course,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great question and a good point. There's nothing about this that restricts you to use these cool tools and that cool API to get your relationships back. It's PHP and DAO, and it's got a fine data access object layer that you just write your basic SQL if you prefer. And you don't need to map it to any domain objects, then don't. And I mean, in fact, for association tables and stuff like that, I usually don't model those as domain objects, and I just do what I need to do in a model class to insert related fields.
Yeah, because sometimes like, multi-table joins can get pretty tricky in active record patterns, and it's easier just to be like, I know how to write it in SQL and just stick that in there.
It's true. In this case, the relational active record is pretty powerful. I agree, though, that you do have to spend the time to get familiar with its syntax. And then at the risk of, I forgot what a join is.
Right. Yeah.
Some interview that I might ask you, I'm so used to leaning on a framework, I've forgotten how to write a complicated SQL. But there's nothing, there's really nothing about this framework that forces you to follow any of its conventions or use really most of its tools. I mean, if you want to use it basically to get the kind of communication and data routing going between a few different layers, then go to town with whatever you like. It doesn't restrict, and it plays very nice with other frameworks. Zen framework in particular has a library of great tools, and it's easy to
Plug it in.
plug it in. Use your favorite Zen pieces, or any other framework that comes.
So I think I have one more question.
Okay.
So you went over sanitization and like SQL injection attacks. I assume is the most basic thing that people prevent. But what about, does it have like a CSRF class to help you, for cross-site request forgery?
It does actually, and in the helper classes, it does have that. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
I did flip through, it does prepare
Prepare
text
state.
record stuff as well.
So that's the provide binding records. I don't know though, I mean, I'm not familiar with the particular issue you were talking about, with the particular driver and PDO. I mean, I certainly never had awesome luck with
SQL Server?
SQL Server. I mean, it supports it, right? But I always move it to some box where it just, whatever.
Right.
Some CentOS, something, just, you don't have these options or, but, yeah.
So if you have lots of sites, let's say there are lots of very simple, CRUD sites that have, 30 pages on them.
Yeah.
A dozen of them. Do you need a different copy of Yii for each one of those?
No.
You can run them all off the same one?
Yes, 100%. Yep. It just, anytime I'm creating that skeleton application, I'm just saying, here's my, I'm using the Yii console command from the framework, so here's basically where my framework's located, and then generate them.
So there's not actually, in that protected folder, that's all like your application code, that's not any of the Yii framework in there?
No, that's right. There's none of the Yii framework in there. That's why if you go to the GitHub, you'll see the blog example has a blog folder and then a Yii 1.1.7. And if you decide to clone it, you'll just get all that. But no, that's right. There's only references. There's core framework. Meaning extending.
Indeed.
Oh, I don't know if you posted the code yet, but can you at least pull up like where the code will live?
Is there?
Okay, it is. So I think it's what, github.com/ AustinPHP
Slash framework.
/
PHP frameworks, tree.
You're missing that slash in there.
Oh, there's one in between here?
Yeah.
Yep. So if
Give the guy credit, it posted 22 hours ago. Mine was posted, like 4 hours ago.
Well, again,
Well,
mine was a
okay.
little bit easy because I didn't have to do a whole lot of actual, I got lucky in that the example that comes with the framework.
Nice.
Download it and commit it.
Basic. I mean, there's some changes,
Sweet.
for sure. And, you know, you get the framework here, and of course the readme. Huge, huge. Okay.
Any more questions, or should we give away some stuff?
Yeah, cool question.
Yeah.
Are your slides available for download?
Oh, I'll definitely make them available, sure. Yeah, I kind of questioned how useful they would be without me, but I question how useful they are with me, so.
I
Yeah, I'll
usually
make them available.
put them on my blog sometimes.
Yeah,
if
I
can-
might add some, I've got some notes in the show notes section of the
Austin's
that
got video.
forgot to actually click on the button. I probably would have reminded myself of a few things I missed, but, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's right in the video.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes.
I just want to comment that if anyone's going to try out Yii, there's an extension tool called Yii that's been pretty useful. I've been using it for about 6 months. And it just adds some functionality to the Active Record classes that I found pretty useful.
Cool. So yeah, there's an extension that extends Yii itself.
GIIX. So that's worth the download, and you plug it into the existing Yii feature set.
Right, right on. Yeah, a good example of how extensible you were asking that tool is. Someone's extended it for you and added extra cool features. That's great. I haven't used that myself, but it sounds cool. Oh, I did also want to mention that recently, I know maybe some of you, because I saw pictures on the meetup, I am starting a specific Yii meetup, which we haven't met yet, and we certainly won't clash with this in terms of time. We haven't picked the time and date yet. But it's on the meetup.com. I've been noticing a lot of framework-specific meetups, and I didn't want you to be left out, so I wanted to join one up. And I was also interested just to see who else in town is using it. I think that'll be fun, and we'll be able to dive a lot deeper into some of these topics. Okay, I'll sit down.